You know how much money I made this year? Just to give you an idea? Zero. I made zero. I haven't made any money this year. I've had a couple of tours, but I made zero. Zero. You know, when I have to fill out my income tax form, you know, for 2000 in December, fucking zero. Zero, 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 zero.
This is Fred. Like many New Yorkers in 2020, Fred has seen his business and livelihood abruptly suspended, with no indication as to when, if ever, it might return. He now lives in a perpetual state of anxiety, clinging fervently to a hope for the city's revival, while so many around him are packing their bags for opportunity elsewhere. Fred and I spent the afternoon in Central Park discussing its beauty, the dynamics, and its importance. But like everyone else in New York, there is so much else on our minds. Despite suffering through this economic distress at the age of 70, Fred shares with me a quiet but enduring faith in the city and the resilience of spirit of its inhabitants. And as the economic suppression continues at a glacial pace, we look for a common understanding of what are the limits of this endurance and what it means to be a New Yorker in the hardest year in living memory.
This area was neglected for 40 years. 40 years, nothing got done up here. So you can imagine what it looked like. All the stream banks had collapsed. If you look over there, you see those pegs? When they reconstructed this, what they did was they had sacks of walnut shells, and they placed them in. And walnut shells are used a lot because they never deteriorate. And they pegged them in, so that way they stabilize the stream banks. You know, there's something about the peacefulness, the calmness, the sweetness of nature that people crave, whether they know it or not. And without Central Park being here, people would have found something else, whether it was in Jersey or whatever. They would have found a green space. And if this was all built up, in other words, instead of having a park here, we had skyscrapers or whatever it might be, it would obviously be a very different city, but I think it would be a difficult city to live in. And they weren't into cutting-edge architecture, like using the latest materials. They went back into antiquity to build these arches. And this particular arch, the Glen span, is what's called ashlar masonry. And ashlar masonry, this type of masonry, goes back thousands of years. The Mycenaeans, the Phoenicians, all knew how to construct this type of arch. And here you can see that the stone has been very carefully dressed. Now, the other thing about Central Park, you know, all the excavation that was done here, because this ground that we're on was marshy and rocky. That was it. There was nothing here. It was unusable. You couldn't farm on it because it was so rocky. You know, you have this massive rock, and there was no soil really, so it was just basically a wasteland. There's very little mortar, but what I really love about it is the texture of the stone. And these, to a geologist, Central Park is like a wonderland, because these stones contain all type of mineral. And you know, tourmaline and garnet, and you see these little, these are called granophyls. This is mica, right? Now mica is one of the hardest substances on the planet. It's 4 down from diamond. You can see it's just held up by pressure and gravity. How they did it? Pretty easy. I mean, not easy, but they basically built a wooden falsework, a ring in the shape of the arch. They laid the stones on top of the woodwork. They dropped in the keystone, pulled the wood out, and prayed that they built it right. And then the stone sagged on itself, and the pressure of the friction and the gravity is what holds it up. There's nothing new about this. Now look here, look at this beautiful quartz. And this was formed when the rocks were forming. They were cooling in another a vein of a different type of rock forced its way in as these were cooling. Look at this. This is beautiful. Is New York City dying? And it's a nonsense. New York City's not dying. I mean, when you look at what New York has been through since its inception in the 1600s, the British take over. There's the Bolting Act, which all flour has to be milled in New York City. Is any flour being milled in New York City now? But even more recently, you look at the shipping industry. Just take a walk along the river, and you see all the piles in the river. Each one of those supported a pier. There were over 950 piers encircling the island. How many piers are there left now? You walk through the garment district disappeared. The printing industry disappeared. New York City is a city that has constantly reinvented itself. So I'm not worried about New York City. New York City will take care of itself, and it will be here for the next 1,000 years. Of this, I have no doubt. But the question becomes, where am I going to be? What am I going to be doing in this city? What is the future for a 70-year-old man? I have lived my life, and I've been through many careers. I've never worked in an office. I've always earned my own money, so to speak. And it's always been difficult, but I always felt like it was worth it because I didn't have anybody to answer to. I didn't have a boss. I led my own life all through time, no matter what it was. And the opportunities were always there. I always felt like someday I'd be home, and there would be a knock on the door, and it would be a government agent. He would say, Mr. Flancer, what do you do? I go, what do you mean, what do I do? No, they say, well, that's not acceptable. You have to go out there and you have to be a productive member of society. You have to get a job or whatever it was. But that never occurred. You could do what you wanted. As long as you made a living and it was within the framework of the law, you had a wide latitude to pursue a living. Now that path has been very curtailed. It's a very narrow path. Where before we were tour guides, we go out and do tours. There were 65 million people coming to the city, and we had a wide variety of things we could do. Now we got nothing. So the pandemic ends, and we all wake up one morning and we go get our vaccine or whatever it is, and we're okay. What is the city going to be like? What is it going to offer us? How are we going to live? Are we going to be able to lead a comfortable life? Are we going to be able to live any life without the intervention of the government? Me getting my $600 a week until I die, I've never depended on the government for anything, but now I'm totally dependent on the government to put food on the table, or else I would starve to death. If I wasn't getting the 183 and hopefully the 6, how do we live? It's frightening. It's frightening. Let's say a group of robins lays 100 eggs. Just a group. 10 will live to hatch. And then from that hatch of let's say 10 out of 100, only one will grow to maturity. So most of the robin's eggs are failed to produce offspring. And if they did, the place would be just filled with robins, because it is filled with robins, even with that low reproductive rate.
You know what I love most about birds in New York is they're so ubiquitous. I mean, like the robin, the sparrow, the starling, the pigeon, but yet their own internal private lives we know so little about. Just like I could see a billionaire on the street in New York, I'll never see what their home looks like.
Right.
I'll see a million pigeons, millions and millions throughout my life, and I'll never see their coop. I'll never see where they nest.
That's right.
I'll never see where they lay eggs.
That's right.
I'll never see where they go to die.
Well, you can see them in the street. I saw a pigeon get run over in the street. Its whole rear side was crushed. And it had one moment of recognition before it died, I guess. And I was there, I watched it, and the pigeon just went and died. But it literally was heartbreaking to see that one moment of recognition when the pigeon knew that it was dead. I used to tell people on tour, particularly to kids, I would say to them, if you see a baby pigeon, let me know immediately, because no one in New York has ever seen a baby pigeon,
Yeah,
ever.
I've never seen one.
And you know why? Because they grow to maturity in the nest, and by the time they're ready to fledge, they're basically fully grown, so you wouldn't be able to tell a baby pigeon from a full-grown pigeon.
I know you can tell like starlings age based on how bright their feathers are.
Yes, and the same with most birds, as you can tell. Hawks, red-tailed hawks, they don't get the red tail until they're older.
I know with grackles, anyway, they're one of my favorites simply because their feathers are just this iridescent green and purple.
Yes.
But yet when you stand back, they look black. They look black as a crow, but you get up close and there's just amazing color on those birds.
Well, and you know, that's very interesting, because the same effect that gives you a blue sky is one of the reasons that some birds reflect the colors around them, because they don't have any internal color in their feathers. They reflect what's in the sky. I didn't follow the guidelines 100%. I didn't stay in my house because I felt like I was going to go nuts.
Yeah, me too.
I'm going to go nuts. I can't stay in my house 24/7 unless they said, look, you have to stay in your house to beat this. But they didn't. They said you could go out for a walk. So I said, okay, fine, I'll go out for a walk. So at night, I would come out and I would walk from my house on 116th, and I would go down 5th Avenue. And I walked by Flowers on 5th, the hospital. Now it's an assisted living facility. And outside the assisted living facility, there would be 7, 8, 9 ambulances lined up, right? And they would be loading the old folks into the ambulances, right? Taking them down to Mount Sinai, wherever it was, to die, right? And I said to myself, oh my God, you know, I'm in the prime risk group. They say anybody over 65 is in the prime risk group. I'm in the prime risk group, okay? Now, at that point, it was terrifying to think that you could get this disease and die alone, you know, hooked to a ventilator. It's terrifying. And then one night as I'm coming down, I see the Billy Graham, you know, the trucks coming down, those massive semi-trailers that are portable hospitals. And on the side, it said disaster relief. Right? Disaster relief. And I said to myself, holy fuck, this is a disaster. Because when you think of a disaster, you know, you think of a dam breaking or a hurricane or something like that. You don't think of this slow-moving virus as being the disaster that it really is. And when I saw that, I said, fuck, you know, I gotta be careful. Because I don't want to die. I don't want to die because of somebody else's negligence, and that's what I feel it is. It's someone else's negligence. If we would have been warned, etc., there could have been steps taken to mitigate it, but it never happened. And now we see that the government does, well, I'm talking about the federal government. I'm not talking about the state government. The federal government doesn't give a fuck. Their attitude is herd mentality. Let everybody get it. Who dies, dies, and the people that live will live. That's not what the government's role is. The government's role is to protect us, whether it's from the Soviet Union and their missiles at the time, or whatever disease might exist. Their job is to protect the population. That's what the president swears to do, to preserve and protect the Constitution. And that's what I expect. Otherwise, I don't want to be, you know, I'm like you. I don't want them involved in my life. But now we have no choice. We need the money. We can't, our living has been taken away from us. We can't make a living like we used to. We don't need charity, but we need a way to make a living. We need sustenance. What is it? When Mayor de Blasio, he did one thing that I thought was absurd. He stated that, you know, they were going to not issue summonses for public urination anymore. They were not going to issue summonses for sneaking on the subway anymore. And what did that lead to? I don't know what it led to. I can come out on my stop on 116th Street on the 2 train, 3 train, and there'll be literally 30 people swarming the turnstiles. Somebody opens the door and people just swarm in. Why? Because Mayor de Blasio said, it's okay, we're not going to fine you for that. They disbanded the gun control. The police had a special task force that dealt with taking guns off the street. So they defunded that. What are we seeing now? Shootings every fucking day. Murder every day. And they say, well, the murder rate's slightly up, crime is down. I don't care. I don't feel safe on the street anymore. I feel that I'm watching like I was back in the 70s. When you had to have, they would say you had to have eyes in the back of your head. That's the way I feel right now. And why? Because if you're going to defund the police, you're going to say, oh, we're going to... And the cops, this issue with bail, too. No bail, no cash bail. So what is that? Okay, so we say, well, that's fine. It was used to oppress poor people, people of color, etc. But what did it do to the cops? The cops would just throw their hands up and say, what's the point? I take this guy off the street, he goes to court, and he's right back on the street before I get back from filling out the paperwork. So I know for a fact that the police morale is lower than it's been forever. Cops feel like they're just spitting into the wind. I lived through the 70s and the 80s, and people would say, and this would always outrage me, they'd say, I wish, I long for the good old days. And I would look at them and I'd say, what the fuck are you talking about? The good old days? You mean when you couldn't walk outside? When every place you went was dangerous? When you couldn't have a flower bed? When Central Park was a wreck? That's what you long for? I say, that's bullshit. You didn't live here then. Nobody who lived through that wants to see that. And the other thing, they say the Disneyfication of 42nd Street, right? Do you remember what 42nd Street was like?
Vaguely.
It was a shithole. It was dangerous. Cops would say, we're in the tourism industry. If they saw tourists on 42nd Street, they would say, you got to get off here. You better get out of here. It's too dangerous. You don't want to be around here. There were all the prostitutes, the bunco guys, the 3-card money guys, all that shit. So what made the city better? Why do we have 65 million people a year come to this city? The answer is because it's safe. Period. People come here, sure, they want to go to the Met, they want to go to the Broadway and all that, but they also want to be able to walk the streets of a city that's safe. New York City, as intimidating as it might be, is a city of small neighborhoods. And each one of these neighborhoods has tremendous flavor. You can walk through Hell's Kitchen, you can walk through NoHo or Soho or Little Italy or Chinatown, and each neighborhood provides you with a tremendous cultural insight into this city. And it doesn't require you to go to a movie, to be inside. It requires you just to keep your eyes open, to go into restaurants, to sit with people, and to see what New Yorkers are really like. And then you say, well, what is a New Yorker? What is a typical New Yorker? And the answer is, I don't know what a typical New Yorker is, because you have three, E.B. White said it probably best. He says 3 types of people that come here. There's the people that live here, such as myself, who have lived here forever, and we tend to be, as he described it, as somewhat static and staid because we live here and we're used to this city. And there's the commuters that come in every day, they fill the city up, and at the end of the day they go back home to the suburbs and they don't really have a connection with the city. But the key, the people that are the most dynamic are the visitors to this city, people that come to the city and decide they're going to live here, because they bring their dreams with them and their expectations with them. And New York City is still a city that will allow you to fulfill your expectations and dreams. You want to be a movie star, you want to be a Broadway actor, where do you go? You come to New York City, and this is where you cast your die. This is where you get the feeling that you can accomplish anything you want. I've never seen that anyplace else.